Thank you, everybody, to be here, and good afternoon. It feels really good to be here, back in Madrid, back in my hometown. So my name is Jorge Fonturbel, and I'm an investor at Target Global. For those of you who don't know us yet, we are a European VC firm. We are managing around 1 billion in asset under management. We invest across stage in the software, marketplace, fintech, and of course, mobility, where we have a dedicated mobility fund. We are headquartered in Berlin. We have offices also in London, Tel Aviv, and recently we announced Barcelona. So as a Spaniard, I feel very proud to be actively contributing to put Spain on the entrepreneurial market in Europe. Today, I'm very honored to have you all of you here, so thank you very much. It is, in fact, a very complementary panel, so I could perfectly envision in the short term a point in time where half of our trips are actually done on demand using the Cabify app, where the supply of those cars is actually provided by subscription, not anymore ownership of the cars, and with Seagull insuring all of these cars. So I think you should all of you talk after stage. You have something to talk in common. So in 2015, it was the CEO and chairman of General Motors who said that the automotive industry was poised for more change in the next 5 to 10 years than it has happened in the last 15. And this change is not going to come in the short term from autonomous vehicles, but from companies like you who are inventing new business model innovations for the mobility industry. And one of the biggest trends that we're seeing is the change of car ownership. So consumers preferring rather not to buy anymore a car, but subscribing and using other type of mobility solutions. So the first question goes for you, Mariano. So what has been the impact on, of your on-demand service like Cabify on making people less dependent on the cars? And as Uber announced very recently, as more and more services, mobility services are appearing in the city, what is going to be the role of Cabify on aggregating all of these services under the application?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here at the South Summit. For us, it's of course, our core business. The day that Juan decided to create Cabify, it's the same idea today. If you think about mobility today and the last 40 or 50 years, probably there has been a small change in the way we move, in the way we consume mobility. Of course, there's a couple of alternatives today. There's not so many, but there's a couple of companies like us that are approaching a new business model for the consumer to give them the possibility or the alternative to consume mobility or to move in a very different way in the city. As you mentioned, people are not interested anymore to buy cars or to maintain them. If you consider that probably there's only 2 or 3% of the time this car is being used. And of course, a company like us, and when we see not only taxis, but also PHVs or UVTCs, is the way we call it here in Spain. Comparing to that 2 or 3% of percentage of occupancy, we are talking about 75% of occupation. So, of course, there's a totally different way to approach the mobility, to provide services for the people to pay only by use of this new, to buy kilometers or to buy time, but only paying for that. And of course, people is really used to more and more to this kind of services. As you mentioned, we are approaching not only considering about vehicles with drivers, but also many kind of different alternatives to move around the city. We are also providing alternatives like kick scooters, like motorbikes, also taxi. Probably most of the people don't know that we are doing more taxi rides in the whole world than any other alternative, even more than PHVs. we are probably one of the most biggest platforms, taxi platforms in the world, and we are very proud of that, of course. So I believe that the market is really small grain. We are expecting that this industry will grow a lot, probably more than 5 or 8 times in the next 10, 15 years. And we hope that the things that really is going to change a lot, because we need that change. We cannot still doing the things like we are doing today. There's no a sustainable mobility the way we're doing today.
Yeah, in fact, mobility as a service is a now more common use word, and the question for us is who is going to be the player at the end, who's going to aggregate all the services around, and definitely you guys have a very good platform to start building new verticals. So apart from ride-hailing, there are new models like car subscription that are playing a key role to change the ownership of the cars. Car subscription emerged basically to cover the gap between the by-minute car rental companies and the traditional leasing contract. So Hans, as you are introducing an all-inclusive service, how are you making customers understand the value that you're bringing versus the traditional buying a car, buying insurance, repairing the car, maintaining the car, and so on?
Yeah, so, well, thanks first for the invitation. I think there's several key facts here. So there's, if you figured out for the past 50 years, how do you access a car if you need a car for the longer term, 99% of those transactions take care in a physical place, dealership, right? So the experience of going into a dealership really, I don't think it's very good. There's a lot of friction. You go and visit a dealership, contracts, you have to wait 3 weeks for the car, and at the end of the day, you need to hire insurance on the side, and maintenance later, pay for maintenance. And so owning a car has become expensive. And what we basically do is we try to bring that convenient to the customer, where not only it's a 100% digital process, but also with a monthly subscription fee, everything is included and you don't have to worry about anything. And plus the added value comparing to traditional leasing, that you can swap cars or change cars if your needs change, right? I think that's an extremely important value that before wasn't as valued as today, and I explain why. But at the end of the day, a perfect example is if we see car sales in Spain in August, they dropped to the lowest in 10 years. So, and we grew to 100% in August. So the question that you were saying, how do you tell people or educate people or tell people that don't buy a car and subscribe to a car? I don't think that it's a job that we are doing now. I think that the market is doing it for us. Why? Because now we have restrictions of pollution, and for example, diesel is getting banned. So basically people and consumers now have the doubt that if the car that they buy today, they're going to be able to use it tomorrow or in a year, right? So if they make that investment and they have to sell it and buy a new car in a year because they cannot go into the city with that car, then it doesn't make sense to buy a car. And the solution that we provide is, listen, just subscribe to a car, pay a monthly fee, and if in the future you need to change car, you just swap it, right? But I think that what is happening is that consumers' minds are changing. People are more used to, because services like Cabify and other mobility services, they are experiencing that you can move in different ways and paying by what you use. And our concept is being able to get away from that friction that exists of buying a car for the longer term into a 2-minute process online and getting the car at home and forgetting about that friction, right? And that's the idea.
Sure, thank you. So supporting all these businesses is insurance. So, and vehicles now, with, for example, in your model, they need to be plugged in and out of your marketplace, or it could be in the case of Cabify that vehicles are going to be ride by different drivers. So, and this is where traditional, insurance model don't really fit. So, question to you, Harry, is how are you collaborating with all these new and supporting all these new mobility services, and where do you see the more potential for usage-based insurance?
Well, I think we've got two business models here which just demonstrate exactly what we've been kind of talking about, which is a rise of usership and a decline of ownership we've talked about on-demand usage, pay per mile, pay per minute. And what we're doing at Zego really is to try and facilitate that, to try and support companies like these with insurance which is far more fit for purpose. You mentioned that traditional insurance companies would have a very traditional approach to this, but if you're getting car dealerships that are not selling in mid-August, then why should everybody be paying full insurance in mid-August? And so what we're really trying to do is to say that companies like Cabify, like Bibi, they are working with data. They know exactly who is doing what, where, and when. And that data, if they can share it with us, then we can give them an insurance product which maps exactly what's going on. And that really, we believe, is fairer for all. So an end consumer pays only when they are driving. They pay only when someone's in the back of the car at a higher rate because ultimately the risk is higher. And when companies are on lease subscriptions, you're not having to go out and buy a separate insurance policy. If you do want to buy it separately, you can buy it in a very short period, which matches your actual rental term. So there are lots and lots of ways we can do this. You asked where I think we can take this. As a consumer, I'm incredibly excited about the future. As we said, I think the next 10 years in mobility are going to be absolutely amazing, and we're going to see things that we haven't seen before. But I really firmly believe that insurance underpins all of this. Insurance is there as this safety net, but if it is not fit for purpose, if it is stuck in legacy provision, so working with traditional insurance companies and they say this is a one-size-fits-all insurance policy, it is going to slow it down. And insurance really should be there to enable more businesses like this, to enable more people to start companies with kick scooters, which present some really interesting challenges for insurance. When you've got one car and potentially 5,000 drivers, how do you price that? So I see that flexibility in insurance, understanding the data that new enterprises produce and being able to deliver back to those companies flexible and fit-for-purpose insurance is just going to be absolutely vital in this next 10 years of change.
In fact, and as you were saying, this can be extrapolated not only to cars, but any type of vehicle. You mentioned e-scooters, but then you have all the parcel delivery drivers, which their fleets are constantly increasing, that they need also services like you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work across Europe with companies that do food delivery, parcel delivery, people delivery, kick scooters. We actually do a whole range of on-demand liability services that are non-motor as well, but really our focus is on motor because we think that that's the real driver of change over the next decade.
And now switching gears, so another big topic has been regulation. So cities are playing a bigger role in the development of the city. And I have to say that, for example, here in Madrid, we are seeing a constant change in the regulatory environment that affects, in this case, which vehicles, which cars can enter in and out the city centers, or in the case of private operators, how many scooters, where, and can be deployed into the cities. And of course, we all have the ambition of making cities safer, less congested, and less polluted. But municipality, I believe that they often lack all the tools and the knowledge to really orchestrate all the different transportation modes and what is happening in the city. So, for example, in Berlin, and this is a case that I'm seeing like every other day, public transport operators are still sending students to count the number of people that are actually using a bus or actually using the metro. So there is a lot of difference in the ways you're using the data from the customers that comes in any different way, and the way public transport or public entities are dealing with it. So Mariano, Cabify has been at the forefront almost since the very beginning of public relationship with regulators. So how are you working with municipalities to improve and to make them better understand how people are really moving within the city?
Yeah, it's a very good question because it really depends on each of, for example, in our case, each of our 130 cities that we operate, because each situation, it's impossible to compare them. It's impossible to have only one approach. I think it's probably the biggest mistake. From the conception of Cabify, we decided to be really flexible, to really adapt and to have the ability to have a very transparent conversation with the local regulator. First of all, to explain them, okay, because this is a very new, a really new industry for everyone, and of course you cannot expect that each government really understand not only the way that consumers are behaving or starting to behave, but also the new kind of business models and the approach that these kind of companies or that kind of companies like us are having. So the first of all is try to have the same level of conversation. Okay, we have a problem. We all have a problem. We have a problem of moving in around the city. We will have a problem probably in the next years considering pollution, considering the urban space. There's a lot of many complexities in the city, and we are here to help. We are not here to compete against you. We are not here to turn down the public transport. We believe that the public transportation is the best way to move, but we need all to realize that it's not the best, and it's impossible to be the only way to move. You cannot solve. It's impossible to solve all the mobility problems in a city only with public transportation because it's not discretional. It's very difficult to be flexible, to adapt to demand and all of things like that. So let us contribute. Let us collaborate with you. And of course, the second kind of conversation is, okay, probably there's going to be a mistake or a misunderstanding about some kind of things. For example, labor. For example, the impact of the things that you are doing. And probably we are still having a very good conversations with the government. There has been a lot of governments where when we started the conversations, finally we were building a new regulation together with all the private players and the government and the taxi unions. For example, that happened in Portugal, and it took us more than a year and a half to do that. But it's the only way to build something sustainable and to build something that really helps citizens to move easier, to move better. So I think you need to be really, you have to have a lot of patience, of course, but most of all, try to convince them that you are trying to do things well, you are here to help, and we need to change together because it's impossible that the government in any level can do it by themselves. So we hope that the conversations will move to a better position in the near future. Spain has to see more what is happening in Europe, in the northern countries and other European members. But we are very optimistic about that. So we hope we can still working together.
I agree. If public transport is going to continue and will be a major source or option for mobility within the cities, and maybe in urban cities it's more clear, but when you go maybe to rural areas, the impact and the way they operate, it definitely needs to change. So running, when you are moving to rural areas where you have lower density, you need more, flexibility. It needs to be more on demand, and I think this is like where, public transport operators, they can learn from you into how to operate this public transportation in the rural areas, which I believe it's mostly run at a loss at the moment. So Harry, you mentioned before, there is not a one-size-fits-all type of insurance, and in order to offer flexible and tailored insurance to your customer, one of the things that you are doing is understanding the driving behavior of the people. So customers, for example, who have a safer driving pattern, they can pay less for the premium. So across the fleet that you have seen across that you're insuring, have you seen an improvement in the reduction of accidents or fatalities just because they know that you're monitoring them and that they can actually, by improving the way they drive, they can save some money?
Yes. Simple answer, yes. It really depends on who your policyholder is. If you're operating a fleet of commercial vehicles, then your fleet owner ultimately has the control over their drivers. And if they can then see the way in which someone is driving, the way in which that then could impact their insurance policy and their costs, then what Zego is giving them are levers to pull to say, hey, look, I could potentially impact my insurance premium, but I could also impact the impact on my assets, these vehicles that I want to be constantly renting out. If I can see that Harry is a dreadful driver, I want to get him off the road, because it's not just that they might have a claim, it's then one of my rental assets might suddenly stop being used. The key to insurance is relatively simple. You've got to take a little bit more premium than you pay out in claims. And if you can influence people to stop having crashes, then you are going to see significant successes. The challenge really is, what is the biggest signifier of dangerous driving? You might get someone who drives very fast, but actually they're very good, and you might have someone who's completely the opposite. So we've got a long way to go on really understanding that, but the key is that you can receive that data and you can make sense of it quite quickly. To your first point, there is certainly not a one-size-fits-all. I mean, the concept of selling a policy to someone on the first of the year and then not talking to them again for 365 days and just praying that by the end of the year they haven't had a claim is just archaic in a world where everything is on demand. But if you can really understand the detail of how people are engaging with your policy, you just have reams more data, reams more understanding of what could be driving risk, and you'll know how to price the next customer more effectively.
And another topic that cities are promoting is increasing the number of electric vehicles, and battery costs continue lowering, but still on average electric vehicles are more expensive than regular combustion engine vehicles. So subscription hence it's a more affordable way of owning a car. So are you seeing any higher interest from your customers on electric vehicles, and in the future what do you think the percentage of your fleet will represent electric vehicles?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think that obviously the cities are pushing for electric vehicles. The problem is that not only the cost of electric vehicles is really high right now because of future residual values, but the real impediment right now is that the cities are not ready for the consumers to have an electric car. And in a big city like Madrid, where you live mostly on apartments and not a house, how do you, if you have an electric car, you're not gonna put it on your elevator and take it home and charge it, right? You need places on the street to charge the car at night when you're not using it. So we do have electric cars. Actually, they're not one of the best sellers just because the consumers don't have the availability to charge. But what I think last month, 40% of our sales were hybrid cars. So I think there's a transition before we get there, which we are experiencing a lot of demand on semi-combustion, GLP, and other forms of hybrid cars that not only save fuel and are less emission dangerous or contaminate less, but provide the users with the flexibility that they have an eco sticker and they can get into the city and access what is being restricted right now. And we are a new channel for all these OEMs and brands to promote those hybrid cars or in the future electric cars and get to more consumers in a different way than owning the asset or buying the car.
Great. So for the last 3 minutes that we have, I would like to bring a more broad topic. So in ride-hailing, in usage-based insurance, in car subscription, we have seen many of these models appear first in the US. So we all know about the Ubers, Fare.coms, Route Insurance in your case. These are very well-funded companies that started several years before, and they have some more operational experience. Some of them, they came already to Europe. Some of them are about to come. So maybe to address some of the thoughts about the audience, like how do you think European players can compete with very well-funded US competitors and raise barriers against them? And please feel free, any of you.
In my case, you talked about Fare, what they have raised almost $1 billion now in like 3 or 4 years. I think that the markets, particularly about cars and mobility in the US, are completely different than Europe. I think that we have a competitive advantage here in Spain because we understand the market and we've been able to also create a supply model which is a little bit different. And at the end of the day, obviously, you have, you think about what happens if these competitors who are well-funded come into your market. The idea, obviously, for us is to grow as fast as possible. We think they have a lot of work in a huge market like in the US before they really start spreading into new markets in Europe. And our #1 goal right now is to grow the company and to become the household name for an alternative to buying a car in Spain. So that's our short-term view, and we're trying to execute on that.
What do you think, Mariano? You were able to fight Uber here in Spain. We have other success examples, I don't know, like in the Middle East with Karim, which they actually bought. So how did you come across Uber here, and how did you manage to pull different levers to be the dominant player of ride-hailing here
First
in
of
Spain?
all, with differentiation, we really do things in a different way, in a different approach. But considering the question, of course, we see in the mobility field that United States are acting or are supporting their private companies. In China, the government is supporting and have a very active role. But here in Europe, I think we have a very good opportunity for European companies because we really understand the user, and the user is where they have the real rights, or the real rights of course, to respect them. So I think as a local players, of course, we need more support for the governments, for the European Union. And the only way to compete is to be sustainable, to act in a different way, respecting the user, respecting the environment, respecting the rules, and of course, be very, very flexible to adapt to each market.
And as you were saying, you need to know your customer, and I think nobody knows better your customer probably than you, and more specifically the way they drive. So, like, do you see this, getting data from specific countries where, some of them they write on the left, some of them they write on the right? How that differentiates, and you can build an advantage over really understanding deeply the customer?
Well, I think one thing, and I'm very conscious we're right out of time, insurance it's relatively hard to kind of spin up an insurance company. The chain is incredibly long. We're working in areas of unlimited liability, so we have to have huge players. We're backed by Swiss Re at the end of the chain, and getting those sorts of fundamentals set up does take quite a long time in a regulated space. So no amount of enormous funding can advance you much quicker than the regulators will allow you to go. So we've always got the advantage there, but you're absolutely right. Understanding your customer, being completely focused on creating a bespoke solution for your end consumer, be it an individual driver for Cabify or a company that does vehicle subscriptions, being absolutely relentlessly focused on there, because you suddenly become fundamental to their business operations, and we see that day in, day out. And it's much harder for somebody to come in and then remove that because it's so heavily part of the process that companies go through on a day-to-day basis.
Well, thank you very much. I believe we ran out of time. I would like to personally thank all of you for being here with me, and I hope that you guys enjoy the panel. Thank you very much.